I'm Zalairla, and this is The Joy of Computer Gaming, where we investigate good and intriguing examples of computer gaming history. Today's highlighted game is Archon, the beat the Banshee and Basilisk by bringing your bird to burn them in battle game. It's an arcade strategy game created by Freefall Associates for the Atari 8-bit in 1983, and then later was released on MS-DOS, Apple II, Commodore 64, Amstrad CPC, Amiga, ZX Spectrum, Macintosh, Sharp X1, PC-88, FM7, NES, and Palm OS. This is one of my favorite old arcade games that I've come back to many times for a game or two. I've even purchased the remake Archon Classic so I can play a modern version with friends. Now if only of them would dare play against me. The only real story there is in Archon is that there is dark and light, and they must fight. Without much to say, this instead brings me to how this was created from the compelling contrast of white and black as found on a traditional chessboard. The game's art emphasizes this, being a monochrome image with a phoenix representing light and a dragon representing dark. They are battling in a polyhedron that is a pair of merged cubes, with a couple free-floating cubes in the background. This is so reminiscent of artwork by one of my favorite artists, M.C. Escher, that it didn't take me long to find the matching one, titled Stars. Looking at Stars, I noticed the exact same shape here, complete with a little cube floating off in almost the same place as it was behind the dragon's tail in the Archon image. I have to say that I admire the artist's attention to detail here. The actual game has black and white tiles, with green tiles that alternate over time from light to dark. Each player's pieces are a single color, yellow for light and dark blue for dark. Well, except for the Banshee, which actually has two colors, with black for one hand and the darkness within its hood, and the Basilisks with a white face. When the pieces are selected, they come to life, allowing you to move them. A game of Archon is always between the two sides, light and dark. Either of these may be a human player or AI controlled. In fact, the game will start an AI versus AI battle if you don't start the game within 14 seconds. This is easy to escape out of by pressing Select Option or Start. You choose who goes first. The advantage of going second is that the alternating tiles start turning in your favor first, so if the dark player goes first, the alternating tiles will go towards light first. The goal of the game is to either take all 5 power points or wipe out your opposition. If your enemy only has a single unit left, you can imprison them as well, and since they cannot move, you automatically win. The game is played in turns in 2 play areas. For most of the game, you'll be on the strategic screen, which looks somewhat like a chessboard, but it's 9x9 instead of 8x8, and there are a number of alternating tiles. There are 5 power points, which are flashing in the center and the center of each edge. On this screen, you take turns either moving a unit or casting a spell. Your units have a set amount of movement, from 3 to 5, and one of 3 types of movement: ground, fly, or teleport. Ground means you can move orthogonally a number of spaces up to the amount of movement you have, but you cannot move through other units except to land on an enemy unit if you like. Flying and teleporting are essentially the same, they only animate differently. They allow you to move up to your movement spaces away, even diagonally, and over any other units in between. Flying units show themselves flying around while choosing to move. Teleporting units, which are only the wizard and sorceress, do not fly and simply show a teleport animation once you've chosen your destination. A unit in the center of the board with a 4 flying, such as the genie, can reach anywhere on the board in a single move. Unlike chess, the color of each space matters. The lighter the tile is, the stronger light side units will be there, and the darker it is, the stronger dark side units will be. This is done by giving the respective units additional health in combat. Speaking of combat, when you move a piece on top of another piece, instead of simply taking them like you would in chess, you switch to the second play area, which is an arcade arena where your pieces do battle. This is where the actual excitement of the game is, as this becomes like a simple shooter, where you need to take your opponent's health down without dying yourself. The winner takes the spot, and you return to the strategic screen. It is even possible to have both sides lose the fight, leaving the tile blank afterwards. One oddity, however, is that since this was made using a graphics mode with double wide pixels, when you fire diagonally, the shots go at a 60-degree angle instead of a 45-degree one. This also makes moving left or right faster than moving up or down. The background of the arena matches the color of the tile. You can see each unit's health as a bar on the side and their color. In the arena itself are what look like rocks that phase in and out as the battle progresses. In most cases, bumping them will shift your position and they will block your shots, but sometimes when they are fairly faded you can move through them and your shots will pass right through them, though they'll do so slowly. While fighting, you can hear a bell sound which will represent when your attack's cooldown has completed and you can attack again, with a high pitch for the light side and a low pitch for the dark side. After battle, if you survived, first any health you got from the tile's color is removed, and otherwise your unit's health stays the same. This means that an injured unit may stay injured unless they didn't suffer enough damage to go below the bonus they got for the tile. There is a heal spell that you can use to heal a single unit, and staying on a power point regenerates your health over time, but otherwise, damage sticks around. Every unit is unique, and each side has different units, albeit a few being nearly the same. On the side of light, we have knights, archers, valkyries, golems, unicorns, a genie, a phoenix, and the wizard. On the side of dark, we have goblins, manticores, banshees, trolls, basilisks, a shapeshifter, a dragon, and a sorceress. The game never gives you exact stats for health, speed, and damage, and even though the internet has them all available, I'll just use vague terms to describe them all. The knights and goblins are the grunts of the game. Each side has 7 of them, and they can move 3 spaces on the ground. They have low health, do low damage, and have a very fast recharge time for their attacks, which are melee range only. The knight stabs with his sword and the goblin swings his club. In general, they are almost completely worthless, though they can be a great annoyance in the hands of a skilled player. The archers and manticores are your frontline ranged units. They have 3 ground movement, do low damage, and have a moderate recharge rate. But archers' shots fire faster, and manticores have a wider shot and have more health, though neither has a large amount of health to begin with. Golems and trolls seem pretty much identical. They have 3 ground movement. In combat, they're the only unit that moves slower than others and have a long recharge rate. Slow boulder projectiles that do a lot of damage and a lot of health. Unicorns and basilisks are your speed units. Unicorns have 4 ground movement, but basilisks only have 3. They move at the same basic unit speed, but they have a very fast recharge rate and their shots are very fast. The unicorn again has an advantage with more health, but the basilisk's shot is large, so it has a higher chance to hit targets. The wizard and sorcerer don't ever tend to leave their spaces, because if they did, they'd be imprisoned right away by the other side, and rightly so. An imprisoned piece can't cast spells, and they're the only units that can. They teleport 3 spaces and in combat have a decent-sized health pool, recharge at a decent speed, have fast shots, though the wizards are a little slower but wider, and they do moderate damage. All of the other units are unique for each side. On the side of light, the Valkyrie has a fly of 3 and is almost the same as the Manticore in combat with the same amount of health, the same recharge rate, and the same shot speed. They do more damage, however. The Genie has a fly of 4 and is an all-round great unit with decent mobility, above average health, recharge rate, not as fast as a Basilisk, damage, and projectile speed, again not as fast as a Basilisk, with a somewhat wide shot. He doesn't excel anywhere, but he can be used to take on pretty much any unit in the game with a bit of skill. The Phoenix has a fly of 5 and is very strange to use in battle. Instead of having a normal attack, the Phoenix has a burst of fire, but cannot move while this is going on. This does damage over time, so it can do next to no damage, or it can do devastating damage, enough to kill the dragon in 2 blasts. While it is on fire, it is invulnerable to damage, so it can also be used defensively to absorb enemy attacks. It has a moderate cooldown, though not as slow as the dragon. Because of the strange attack, however, it's a hard unit to use effectively. It just completely destroys goblins and banshees, which both have a short range attack and no invulnerability. And a battle with a phoenix and the shapeshifter tends to be a rather lengthy affair. On the dark side, the banshees have a fly of 3 and are also unique. When you press the button, a screen region of damage appears around them. If you let go of the button, you can even move while this is going on. It has a moderate cooldown and, like the phoenix, can do next to no damage or a lot of damage. Never use one against a phoenix though, unless you just want to die, since the phoenix is invulnerable while immolated. The shapeshifter has a fly of 5 and is also unique. Instead of having powers of its own, it transforms into whichever opponent you're facing, though it has advantages from dark tiles instead of light ones. This means that, properly played, the shapeshifter will always have a tactical advantage because you should be keeping it on dark spaces. This also means it's awful for controlling the control points when the colors start shifting towards light, because then your opponents will get the advantage. Oh, and one last thing, the shapeshifter always heals at the end of a battle. Finally, there is the dragon, the most powerful unit in the game. It has a fly of 4, a huge amount of health, does massive damage, has somewhat slow shots, and a long cooldown between attacks. One of my greatest victories in the game was defeating my father's dragon in battle with a knight, because that was a challenge. You know, that was right about the point where he decided to stop playing Archon with me anymore. For spells, you have Teleport, which lets you teleport one of your units anywhere, even on enemy units, Exchange, which swaps the position of 2 units, Imprison, which prevents a unit from acting for a while, Heal, which heals a unit all the way, Revive, which can be used to bring a dead unit back to life, Summon Elemental, which summons a 1-use elemental to fight with a randomly selected element from Earth, Air, Fire, or Water, and Shift Time, which switches the direction of the color shifting. Shift Time has 2 other effects. It reverses the time for Imprison, so if you cast it right after a unit has been imprisoned, they won't stay imprisoned for very long. It also will switch from light to dark, or vice versa, if cast during the full light or dark cycle of the alternating tiles. The space your wizard or sorceress starts on gives bonus health to anybody standing on it that gets lowered every time you cast a spell. So your caster will technically be getting weaker over time from casting spells, since you don't tend to leave the starting tile with them. With all of the spells, you cannot target a unit that's on a power point because they give the unit Shroud. I mean, they make them untargetable. Aside from starting the game, which you set up using Option Select and Start like most Atari games, the entire game is played with a joystick for each player. In the strategic view, you have a highlight box which you simply move over the target piece and press a button to activate it. Move it to the position you want it in and press the button again to end your turn. The Wizard and Sorceress also allow pressing the button on them a second time. This pulls up a list of spells to cast. You can press up and down to scroll through the list and the button to choose which one you want. An option called Cease Conjuring is also available to cancel casting. In combat, you are in direct control of your piece. You move and press the button while moving to fire. Holding down the button prevents you from moving, so you will pause briefly when you shoot. Since the controllers were digital, this gave you 8 directions to move and fire. Knights and goblins technically fire, so it feels right to use their attacks compared to other units, but the shot doesn't actually move. Area of effect units, the Phoenix and the Banshee, can just press the button at any time without pressing a direction to do their attack. The Banshee is unique because you want to lightly tap the button to start your Screech effect, then you'll be able to keep moving. If you hold down the button, you won't move. The AI is functional, but a bit limited given the processing power of the old Atari computers. In the strategic view, the AI will start off moving its units to light spaces on the light side and dark spaces on the dark side. They are somewhat conservative about when they move to take the power points, only doing so when the cycling colors favor them. On occasion, they will summon an elemental to attack the other side's powerful creatures, such as the Phoenix Genie or a Unicorn on the light side, and a Dragon, Shapeshifter, or Basilisk on the other side. Or they might teleport one of their units to a favorable spot occupied by an enemy unit. They may also imprison one of the powerful units and may shift time if their own unit gets imprisoned. In battle, they are very active and will move constantly, but they move different depending on what kind of unit they are using. Goblins, Knights, Banshees, and the Phoenix will close the distance as quickly as possible, evading when their attack is on cooldown. The Phoenix will also use its fire to absorb incoming shots if it can. Everything else uses the same AI pattern, which moves somewhat randomly and takes occasional shots at the enemy. This all works rather well for the most part, but eventually you learn how to exploit it. The best way to deal with the AI is to learn that they are moving on a grid. The AI tries to complete its movement to the next position on the grid before it continues on. You learn to shoot near the endpoints of the AI's grid, so it tends to look like you shoot and would miss, and then the AI walks right into your attack. The position of the grid allows the AI to largely ignore the terrain objects. Sometimes, however, it becomes obvious the AI has no clue about the terrain and will bump into it or even shoot it, oftentimes many times in a row, causing it to get stuck. There is a little intro song when the game starts up. I rather like it, but it's only about 30 seconds long. The sounds in the game are all fairly unique and fit the game rather well. Almost every unit makes a different sound while they're moving, from the stony stomps of the Golem and Troll, the whirling sound of the Banshees and Genie, and the cloppity sound of the Unicorn. Basilisk and the Dragon make weird sounds I wouldn't expect from them. In battle, the shots all sound almost the same, though the Phoenix has a weird flamey sound, and the Banshee makes a high-pitched but not terribly unpleasant scream-like sound. The turn sounds and cooldown timers and hits are all high-pitch for light and low-pitch for dark, making it easy to tell who's hitting who, though the AoE effects of the Phoenix and the Banshees don't cause a hit sound. Growing up, I had 2 challenges when learning and playing Archon, the AI and my father. My dad could easily defeat the AI, and he destroyed me in battle when I tried to play. He told me that kids have better reflexes than adults, and I should be better at the game than he was. This started me playing the game quite a bit, largely against the AI. After a while of learning how to defeat the AI, I then decided to defeat the AI even better than that. I gave myself limitations, and finally ended up being able to take on pretty much every AI-controlled unit with only my Knights or Goblins, except computer-controlled Knights and Goblins, which I've never been able to defeat one-on-one. Oh, and of course the Banshees, which just destroyed my Knights. But there are ways to beat all of the other units with them. Those Goblin versus Unicorn battles were the most exciting and intense battles I've ever had against the AI. With this level of skill, I took on my father a few times. It was a rather one-sided battle after I'd practiced probably way too much for a silly game. After I was able to beat his dragon with only a mere knight, he was defeated. I beat my greatest adversary in the game, Dad. And now he no longer wanted to play the game with me for some strange reason. Being able to defeat most enemies with knights and goblins isn't an ability I still have, since I don't play as often, and a long period went by between when my parents gave away our Ataris and me being able to play again with emulators. I had to try a few times to make the fake videos for this section, though I can still get some decent damage in with them before they die off to range opponents. I wasn't going to have a bugs section at all, since as far as I knew there weren't any real bugs in the game other than some AI oddities. But as I was recording for this video, I encountered one. So, off to the internet to look for others, and I only found one other that I couldn't duplicate. When using teleport, the highest pixel isn't undrawn during the teleport effect. This is easily seen in goblins since they raise their club when teleporting. The AI is a bit wonky in battle, due to the way that they try to move and their grid pattern. Because the terrain is ignored by the AI, it causes confusion for it. It will happily repeat this pattern of trying to shoot me without moving to a better position. There were a few different ways to cause it, one I didn't even have to move. At the bottom, the AI will constantly bump around here until the terrain changes. I had this sitting here for a few minutes and it just keeps doing this. Someone else on YouTube named MWK1 found a glitch that I couldn't duplicate where the AI just completely stopped moving. I tried duplicating this and couldn't, but it may require a frame exact position you need to get or bump the right terrain boulder to cause it. I've provided a link to their video. In any case, I've always enjoyed Archon. I wish more people could have fun playing a simple one-on-one game like this, but at least I have Archon Classic now to try to push on my gaming friends. Maybe I'll find more people to compete with. This is a great game, and I'd give it an 8 out of 10. For some odd reason, online every site likes to call the game Archon the Light in the Dark, which seems so foreign a name to use for the game. The phrase, the light in the dark, doesn't even exist anywhere in the original game, nor in the manual. It is on the box art, though. However, that is a tagline, not a subtitle for the game. Across the various versions of the game and its manuals never once refer to the game itself as anything but simply Archon. Even their website only calls it Archon. Archon 2 Adept, which does have a subtitle of Adept, always shows up with a subtitle. If Freefall intended the full name for Archon to include the light in the dark, they would have used it somewhere, like the Amiga version with its updated graphics, which was created by Freefall itself. In any case, the game came out for a number of other systems, all with their own differences. This is the Commodore 64 version by Freefall Associates, released in 1984. The sounds are a bit different, almost muffled sounding. The units in the board look almost the same, though the units have a black border around them here. The battlefield, on the other hand, looks rather different. The terrain here is greatly simplified, and oftentimes the health bars were almost impossible to see on the edges. Running into a terrain object always bumped you over to the right side of it, so going from left to right is way faster to do than the inverse, where you normally would get stuck in all directions just like the original game. This gives an advantage to the light side since they get stuck less often in battle and can charge forward with greater speed. Still, aside from this, with a couple of joysticks, the game felt pretty much the same. Here is the Apple II version by Jim Mitchells, I believe, released in 1984. It shows the box art at the beginning while playing the main theme. In-game, the graphics in this version are largely the same as the Atari 8-bit version, but with different patterns instead of colors on the game board to show the color phases. Everything about the game felt pretty good to play using the joysticks, though we couldn't figure out how to cast spells. In combat, there's even a little tick at the top of your health bar to show where your health was at the beginning of the fight, which is pretty nice. However, the sound is quite raunchy. After my first battle, I was grinning because it sounded so silly. A couple battles later, and I was laughing and I couldn't stop, for all the wrong reasons. Here's what it sounded like fighting the dragon with my knight. It gets worse with some units like the genie versus the dragon. And the worst is with the phoenix being involved at all. I'm a phoenix! I was laughing so hard I could barely breathe and my eyes were watering so I couldn't see. That didn't stop my wife, who was not as amused, from destroying my phoenix in battle. I dubbed this version Archon, for farts and giggles. I was far too amused by this, and why yes, of course I'm being totally mature here. Why do you ask? This is the MS-DOS version by Mission Accomplished Incorporated, released in 1984. This has to be one of the most unpleasant ports I've ever played because everything about this is just wrong. First off, it's in CGA with internal speaker sound. That's all PCs had back then, but it's an awful place to start. I tried playing twice, once with the keyboard, which had this ridiculous keyboard scheme by default, and once with the joystick. Let's start with the keyboard version. I set it up to use the number pad. It is obvious right off that they didn't use a very good keyboard handler, because the moment you press a second key, the first one counts as unpressed. so you couldn't just use up, down, left, and right to move, you have to use the diagonals. This makes combat very awkward, as it is hard to move around. To fire, you have to be pressing the direction you want to fire while pressing the fire button, which felt even worse, and since you press the fire button, you stop moving. Requiring movement with the keyboard on fire is a terrible idea. I hated playing with these controls. However, it didn't get much better with the joystick. The motion felt better, except that it felt a bit sticky. At first I couldn't place it until I realized your pieces could only move entire spaces at a time, instead of having a free position like the original. Couple this with the fact that you had to push a direction to fire, and that wiped out any movement, just like on the keyboard, and this felt pretty bad to play even with the joystick. My advice is to stay away from this port. Here is the ZX Spectrum version by Ariolasoft UK, released in 1985. It's a special version. At the beginning you get this screen. I don't know if it's my emulator's fault or the game's fault, but if I try to use Kempston for each player, they just both get controlled by the same joystick. So I was forced to play on the keyboard while my wife played on her Kempston. The keyboard controls are wonky. Q for up, A for down, Z for left, X for right, and C to fire. Looking at an actual ZX Spectrum, this arrangement is just as awkward on it as it was on my PC keyboard. Controlling it is very hard to do. Here, look at me fumble! For my wife using the joystick, she said it felt clunky and less smooth than the other versions we tested. The graphics look decent, a lot like the original graphics, except the sprites are being zored onto the screen so they cause weird glitches when they overlap each other. And just like Loadrunner for the ZX Spectrum, when two sprites are near one another, they can only have a single color, so your colors change a bit. The sounds are almost non-existent and do not sound particularly great. Right off, my wife used one of her favorite units, the Banshees. They are devastating in this version. They're really fast, and when they deal damage, they cause a little lag, so they seem to cause even more damage because of it. The same problem occurs using the Phoenix as well. Once you cause damage, the game lags, and it seems to do far more damage than it otherwise should. Here's the Amiga version by Freefall Associates, released in 1985. It was difficult getting this to work since the original only worked properly with a specific ROM version called a kick on the Amiga. Even with the correct ROM, though, it was crashing for me, though I'm not sure whether the game or the emulator is at fault for that. The version I'm playing is an enhanced edition made to work with a wider variety of Amigas, and with Kick 1.3, I was able to get it to play. It has a unique intro image and updated graphics. The sound effects for the units were a bit strange, especially the springy sound for the basilisks. The strategic screen looked nicely updated at least. Getting into a battle had a nifty little transition effect with some sliding and panning effects, though it was a little bit on the slow side. The actual battle felt fine to play, but the diagonals were at a 45-degree angle, which took a little adjusting to. Still, this looks like a decent enhancement to the original game without really changing any elements of it. There is supposedly a Macintosh version of the game available, but I cannot find it anywhere. Not even in any of the game archives I could find. The one site that said it used to have it for download removed it because Electronic Arts told them to remove all EA products. I couldn't even find any other screenshots. This is the PC-88 version of the game by Bulletproof Software and released in 1986. It has a unique animated version of the game image at the beginning with a decent rendition of the theme song. During gameplay, a calm song played while in the strategic screen and a faster song played during battle. This was a weird version to play. You have to open the menu and choose who is human. On my PC keyboard, the light player was controlled with W, A, D, and X to move and 1 for fire, and the dark player was 2, 4, 6, and 8 on the number pad to move and home for fire. Neither felt particularly great to use. The strategy screen worked pretty much the same as any other version. The battle mode, on the other hand, was not great to play with. The background didn't reflect the color of the tiles, your pieces move a bit on the fast side, firing requires pressing a direction to shoot, which doesn't feel good on a keyboard, the shots are really fast and pretty much impossible to dodge, there are some color glitches on the models as they move, and the Phoenix fire in particular causes lots of display glitches. The sounds were interesting at least. There was supposedly a Sharp X1 version available, but I could not find it anywhere. I spent far too long searching for it, I give up. Here is the Amstrad CPC version by Linsoft Ltd. And released in 1985. The start menu is rather reminiscent of mail-order monsters with the flashing menu selections. This isn't remotely a good port of the game. Only one player can use a joystick, maybe the Amstrad CPC only supported a single controller. I played on the keyboard as light, and the controls were W and X for up and down, space for fire, but for some odd reason, F and H were left and right. Looking at the original computer, the keys are in the QWERTY position, so this arrangement is a bit baffling. Everything looks like a very goofy or distorted version of the original images. Look at this dragon! What happened to you, dragon? The strategic screen is very sluggish to use. None of that even touches on the bad sound or the nearly complete lack of it. And then you go into the combat. Oh my, this combat is so slow. This is the complete opposite problem we encountered with the PC-88 version. You still have to push a direction to shoot, but that is so slow you could run away from the shot and then dodge off to the side with room to spare and not get hit. There is no audio indicator that you could fire again, though with as long as it takes between shots, you could just twiddle your thumbs waiting. The Dragon, for example, had to wait over 10 seconds to recharge after firing. The Phoenix's fire was small and just burnt along there for over 4 seconds, and your sprites are just zored onto the screen, so when anything overlaps, the colors look really wonky. Nothing in the game felt right to play. This is the FM7 version of the game by Bulletproof Software and released in 1986. It is pretty much identical to the PC-88 version, except the sound is a bit better and it allows playing with joysticks. This improves the gameplay so much it was actually somewhat fun to play. However, my wife and I kept running into each other in the speedy combat, and apparently in this version you cannot pass through each other. You just get stuck to each other like very oddly shaped magnets. Here is the NES version by Bulletproof Software and Activision of all companies, released in 1989. I'm not certain this is the only instance of a game by both Activision and Electronic Arts, but being the number 1 and number 2 game publishers in the US at the time of saying this, I'm fairly certain that they avoid each other as much as possible. In any case, this is a unique entry, though in the intro the Dragon and the Phoenix are twitchy just like the other Bulletproof Software versions, but with a different variation on the same idea. The characters all have a more cartoony, Nintendo-y feeling to them, which certainly isn't a bad thing. When you select them to move, they grow until you place them at their destination and shrink back down. There is a song in the strategic screen as well as the battle, again like the other Bulletproof Software versions. Battles are quite a different thing, however. Depending on whether you're fighting on a light or a dark space, the battlefield takes on a very different look. For light spaces, it's green with a bunch of gravestones that like sinking and lowering to show that they are popping in or out. For dark spaces, you get a bunch of blinking goblin heads rising and lowering from the ground. Your units come into the battle from opposite portals, like a gladiator arena. Moving and firing feels good here, except just like the Commodore 64 version, bumping into terrain always pushes you to the right and down, so moving from the left or top lets you go down and right very quickly, whereas the opposite directions make you bounce. Shooting goes at a 45-degree angle as well. Aside from the bumping terrain issue, the game felt great to play. I could see why this was a popular port of the game. Looking at the box art for the game, what the heck is going on here? I get the wizard and the sorceress on columns, well, kind of. But what the heck are these two things fighting in the foreground? Nothing in the game looks anything like either of them. Here's the Atari ST version by Delta Force, and I have no idea when it was released. This feels like an alpha game with very little actual thought or effort put into it. Your pieces almost all seem to be vehicles of varying sorts. Some can fly like a giant head, I guess that is. But otherwise, they are all the same except movement speed, firing speed, and how much health they have. You can fire again as soon as your bullet hits anything. There are no transitions, your units always face the same direction, When you make a move, the cursor doesn't even move, it just changes color and the other player has to move from wherever you left it. It doesn't even match the colors of the teams. Oh yeah, and there's no sound. Everything in this game just plays poorly. This has to be one of the absolute worst pieces of trash I've played in a long while, and I've recently played Diamond Dash Robot Knights Rings of Zilfin and Tutankhamun for Pete's sake. There was a Palm OS version of the game that appears to be completely unavailable anymore. Every link I've found for the developer, Emperor Studios, is to a domain name that says it's for sale. Every link to find the game ends on a 404 error. A sequel was made the year after Archon came out called Archon 2 Adept, where you play Order versus Chaos. This adds a number of nifty features, such as giving each side 4 mages that use magical energy you collect to cast spells, which they can reuse all they want as long as you have the magic available. You collect more energy by being on the power points, which move through the 4 elements on the board, as well as there being 2 that stay fixed in the void. Your other creatures must be summoned. Each side has a unique list of elementals, as well as a shared list of demons they can summon. And yes, everything up to this point sounds great, until you start playing the game. You see, everything is so heavily tied into your magical energy, how many creatures you can summon, what other spells are available, and even how much health your citadel has should a final fight be called. If you start to slip at all in contrast to your opponent, you fail very hard, very fast. You win by defeating all enemy mages, touching all 6 power points on a given round, or winning an apocalypse battle. Playing against the AI is simply awful as well. You can somewhat control your wizard's shots, but the AI has so much more control than you do. You have a wraith that's invisible and can steal health? Well, the AI knows exactly where your unit is at all times and just destroys you before you could get close. got a Juggernaut that's invincible while it's charging. The AI can precisely time and aim its Juggernaut's shots, so it just needs to hang out right on top of you and destroy you slowly, or quickly. I hate playing against the AI in this game so much. This is Archon Ultra by Freefall Associates for MS-DOS and released in 1994. The game has VGA graphics, music, and digital audio. Unfortunately, aside from how it looks in comparison to the original games, there isn't much positive to say about this game. The view for the game is more like battle chess, where it shows light on the bottom and dark on the top. Battles are very much reminiscent of mail-order monsters, insomuch as there are even giant mushrooms and rocks that look very similar between the two. Since Paul Ritchie III worked on the original Archon, mail-order monsters, and Archon Ultra, this isn't a big surprise. Unfortunately, while this style of combat worked well in mail-order monsters, it didn't work very well at all as an Archon game. Aiming is dodgy, many attacks seem almost useless, such as the Golem Stone, which falls after a few feet then explodes and does nearly no damage. Even though a lot of units get secondary attacks, they largely didn't do anything meaningful like the Unicorn's measly jump, or the stone mode for the Golems. The game plays rather sluggishly, regardless of what speed I set DOSBox to use. The units always move rather slowly on the board, and they feel very slow in combat. Look at how slow the Unicorn is, for example. Compare these to the original Archon and you see a remarkable difference. In short, I really didn't enjoy this version of the game. Apparently a board and card game was released in 2002 called Archon Skirmish. Aside from a list of some of the rules and the couple of images you see here, I can't find anything else about it. This is Archon Evolution by Leigh Bowers and Studio 41, which was only ever released as a beta in 2008. It was never completed because React Software later got the rights to Archon and put out Archon Classic, which we'll look at in a few. This is as close to the original as you can get on the PC, with only updated graphics and sound. What is unfortunate is that this project was never completed. You can't remap the controls or change any settings, it's stuck in 16-bit 640x480, AI was never added. You can apparently play online with other players, but I only tested the local versus mode. The controls are a bit strange and only on the keyboard. If this could have been done via joystick, I could see it being enjoyable. However, the keyboard controls are WASD and left shift for the light side, and the arrow keys and right shift for the dark side. Since you're both using the keyboard and multiple keys, we regularly had our characters get frozen as it didn't properly register the shift keys being released, and we had to press shift again to move. This made combat a bit clunky to do. The graphics are alright, though they look a bit rough around the edges. The sounds seem like placeholders, they aren't very good. There is no music. The firing angles are just like the Atari version at 30 or 60 degree angles, which is good for me and bad for my wife. And they nerfed the Banshees for some reason, which cannot move while their scream field is going on, or maybe they just never coded support for it. Without joystick support, I can't recommend this version. Here's Archon Classic by React Software for Windows and released in 2010. This is probably where all the effort that was going into Archon Evolution ended up migrating. Here's a game that actually feels like a worthy successor to Archon and adds quite a lot more. I even like their electronic version of the theme song. There's a campaign mode and there's the classic Archon mode. In campaign mode, you duke it out with the AI across various maps with set battles, which include leveling up your units. I didn't play much of it. In Archon mode, you choose up to 4 players, choose various settings, the map, and so on to play with. I chose to be classic light side and my wife was playing modern dark side. The classic light side ended up using a variation of the original Atari graphics for your sprites. The modern units look up to date, like fancier versions of the graphics used in Archon Evolution. The sound here is decent and does the job, and the graphics aren't bad though, they aren't mind-boggling either. The gameplay feels right with the gamepads, and even includes the ability to choose classic firing with its 60 degree angles, or with a more standard 45 degree angle for the diagonals. I played this for a bit with my wife to test it out, and it was pretty fun. The combat arena and primary abilities of the units feel great. Many units have additional abilities, such as lifestealing for Banshees, similar to Wraiths in Archon 2 Adept. Others get a secondary attack that actually works with the game, unlike Archon Ultra's abilities, such as the Basilisk spawning mini Basilisks to annoy the enemy, archers getting a second shot, the dragon gets a big breath attack, the Manticore can drop a spike ball that explodes, and so on. This version is pretty fun and costs only $9.99 on Steam, and I'd recommend it for anybody who wants to play a modern version of the game. The only real downside is it doesn't support online play, it's local multiplayer only. A Swedish blog site mentioned a board game was being made for Archon back in 2014 by Jimmy Wilhelmsson. Apparently it is designed to be printed with a 3D printer and will not be sold as a commercial product. It looks interesting, if nothing else. John Freeman said that 3 factors went into the decision to make Archon the way it is. A fantasy chess set he saw at a sci-fi convention with villains and monsters, a live-action chess game he saw at a Ren fair that enacted battles for the spaces, and of course the chess-like game played in Star Wars. Archon was very popular when it came out, as we can tell by the number of ports and sequels that the game had. Though I am unable to find information on the sales figures for it, both Archon and its sequel, Archon 2 Adept, sold very well, and since they were supposedly the first company signed on through Electronic Arts, they were largely responsible for the new publisher's early success. Of course, Mule also contributed, coming out around the same time as Archon, but I already told that story. John Freeman and his wife, Ann Westfall, decided to make their own company, Freefall, in 1982, using half of each of their last names. They also had Paul Ritchie III on board, who helped co-found the company. Shortly thereafter, they were approached by Trip Wilson of Electronic Arts as a publisher. Under Electronic Arts, they created a few other games, but only Archon and Archon 2 Adept achieved very much success. John Freeman helped found Automated Simulations, which later became Epix back in 1978. While working there, he wrote the manuals and was the game system designer for the early Dungeon Quest games, such as Temple of Apshi, as well as Star Quest. He was the lead game designer for Archon and Archon 2 Adept, as well as other less popular titles such as Murder on Zindernuf, Swords of Twilight, and Archon Ultra. I have no idea what he's up to these days. Ann Westfall was the lead developer for Freefall, which is rather exciting since there are so few women who want to be programmers. She started on BASIC and ended up moving to assembly language once Freefall Associates was created. Aside from programming Archon and Archon 2 Adept, she also worked on Murder on the Zindernuf, Swords of Twilight, and Archon Ultra. For several years, she was on the board of directors for the Computer Game Developers Conference. Again, I have no idea what she does nowadays. Paul Ritchie III worked at TSR before helping found Freefall Associates. For their games, Paul seemed to do a bit of everything, being credited with helping with the design, graphics, and programming for Archon and Archon 2 Adept. He worked on other projects too, such as contributing art to Mail Order Monsters. However, he is probably best known for being a co-creator of Star Control and Star Control 2, along with Fred Ford. They created a company named Toys for Bob, which has released a number of other games as well, such as the Horde and the Skylanders game series. He is currently the CEO and creative director at Toys for Bob, which was purchased by Activision in 2005. Talking about Electronic Arts would entail an entire series of its own. I brought up a bit about them back in the Atari days in my Mule video, if you're curious about my take on them.